The stagecoach rocked violently as it hit yet another rut in the rutted trail, causing Tabitha Greenfield to clutch her 6-month-old daughter, Emma, tighter to her chest. The baby whimpered, her tiny face contorting as she began to stir from the nap she'd finally fallen into after hours of fussing. Tabitha closed her eyes, praying that Emma wouldn't start crying again. Not now. Not when they were so close to the next stop. It was 1875, and Tabitha was traveling alone across the harsh Nevada territory with nothing but 2 worn suitcases, a small purse of coins, and her daughter the only piece of her former life worth salvaging. At 22, she had already weathered more heartache than many faced in a lifetime. "Awahi Station coming up," announced the driver from his perch. "10 minutes to water the horses and stretch your legs. We leave promptly thereafter." Tabitha peered through the dusty window at the approaching settlement. Awahi was hardly more than a whisper of civilization in the vast desert landscape, but it represented something vital to her, a place to change stagecoaches for the final leg of her journey to Silver City, where her aunt lived. When the coach lurched to a stop, the other passengers, 2 businessmen and an elderly woman, filed out quickly. Tabitha gathered Emma, who was now fully awake and beginning to fuss, and carefully descended the steep steps. How long until the connecting coach to Silver City? She asked the driver, a grizzled man with a perpetual scowl beneath his bushy mustache. He barely glanced at her. "That'd be this same coach, madam. We leave in 10 minutes sharp." Tabitha nodded and carried Emma toward the small station house, hoping to change her daughter's soiled linens before the journey resumed. The late September air was surprisingly cool, especially after the stifling heat inside the coach. When she emerged from the station house 5 minutes later, Emma was clean but cranky, her little face red as she began to cry in earnest. Tabitha bounced her gently, trying to soothe her as she approached the stagecoach where passengers were already reboarding. The driver was securing luggage to the roof when he turned and saw her approaching with the wailing infant. His expression darkened immediately. "Madam," he said, blocking her path to the coach door, "I'm afraid I can't allow you and the child back on." Tabitha stared at him in disbelief. "I beg your pardon. That baby's been howling most of the way from Elko. The other passengers have complained. I run this route on a schedule, and I can't have a screaming infant disturbing everyone for another 50 miles. "But I've paid for passage all the way to Silver City," Tabitha protested, her voice rising with panic. "My ticket. You can get your money back for the remainder at the station office," he interrupted, turning away. "Or wait for the coach that comes through next week. Your choice." "Next week? I can't stay here a week. I have nowhere to." "Not my concern, madam. Now, if you'll excuse me, we're departing." He tipped his hat with mock politeness and climbed up to his seat. Tabitha stood frozen in place, Emma's cries growing louder as the other passengers averted their eyes through the windows. The station master, a thin man with spectacles, approached her hesitantly. "I'm sorry, miss. Jeremiah's always been particular about his coach." "Perhaps we can arrange. You can't let him do this," Tabitha said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I have to get to Silver City today. My aunt is expecting us and I have no money for lodging here." The station master shrugged helplessly. "I don't have authority over the drivers, miss." The crack of the whip made Tabitha flinch as the stagecoach lurched forward, wheels grinding against the dirt road. She watched in helpless horror as her only means of transportation disappeared in a cloud of dust. Emma continued to wail, as if sensing her mother's distress. "What am I supposed to do now?" Tabitha whispered, more to herself than to the station master, who was already retreating to his office. She stood alone in the street, the desert wind tugging at her dress, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A rider on a tall chestnut gelding was approaching from the north, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. As he drew closer, Tabitha could see he was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. He reined his horse to a stop a few feet away from her. "Seems like you're having some trouble, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "The stagecoach left without me," Tabitha explained, still trying to quiet Emma. "The driver refused to take us because of my baby." The stranger's expression hardened as he looked in the direction the coach had disappeared. That'd be Jeremiah Wells. He's got a reputation for being the most disagreeable driver in the territory. His gaze softened as it returned to Tabitha. "Where were you headed?" "Silver City." "My aunt lives there. I have nowhere else to go." The man considered for a moment, then swung down from his saddle. He was tall, with kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he did now as he approached them. "Name's Jack Calloway," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm headed in that direction myself. I'd be happy to offer you a ride, madam, if you're willing to trust a stranger." Tabitha hesitated, bouncing Emma gently as her cries finally began to subside. She had been warned all her life about the dangers of the frontier, especially for a woman alone. But what choice did she have? "I'm Tabitha Greenfield," she replied finally. "And this is Emma." She studied his face, trying to determine if this man was someone she could trust. There was something reassuring in his steady gaze, no hint of deception or ill intent that she could detect. "It's a pleasure, Miss Greenfield. Or is it Mrs.?" Jack asked, glancing briefly at her left hand, which bore no ring. "It's Mrs.," she said quietly. "My husband is dead." Jack nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. It can't be easy traveling with a little one on your own." "We manage," Tabitha said, lifting her chin slightly. "I can see that." He smiled, then gestured to his horse. "Rusty here is strong enough to carry us all, and I've got supplies for the journey. It's about a half-day's ride to Silver City if we leave soon." Tabitha glanced at the station master, who had emerged from his office and was watching them curiously. "Can you vouch for this man's character?" She called to him. The station master nodded. "Jack Calloway's well known around these parts. Honest rancher from up north. You'd be safe with him, I reckon." Jack smiled at this assessment. "I appreciate the reference, Fred." He turned back to Tabitha. "What do you say, Mrs. Greenfield? Shall we get you and little Emma to Silver City?" Tabitha took a deep breath. The alternative was to be stranded in this dusty outpost with a hungry baby and dwindling funds. "My luggage. We'll fetch it right now," Jack assured her, already striding toward the station. 20 minutes later, with her 2 suitcases secured to the back of his saddle, Jack helped Tabitha mount the horse. It was awkward with Emma, but they managed to arrange themselves with Tabitha sitting sideways in front of Jack, her daughter cradled securely between them. "Hold on tight," he advised as he nudged Rusty into motion. "We'll take it slow until you're comfortable." As they left Awahi behind, Tabitha felt an odd mixture of fear and relief. Here she was, literally placing her life and her daughter's in the hands of a man she had just met. Yet something told her that Jack Calloway was a man of his word. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic movement of the horse eventually lulling Emma to sleep. The Nevada landscape stretched out around them, vast and untamed, dotted with sagebrush and occasional juniper trees. "May I ask what takes you to Silver City, Mrs. Greenfield?" Jack finally asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping baby. Tabitha considered how much to share. "My husband died 6 months ago in a mining accident in Colorado. There was nothing left for us there but debts and bad memories. My aunt is the only family I have left. Jack nodded, though she couldn't see his face from her position. The mines can be cruel masters. I lost my brother to a cave in near Virginia City 3 years back. I'm sorry, Tabitha said, and meant it. There was something about shared grief that formed an immediate connection between people. It's why I chose ranching instead, Jack continued. I prefer the company of cattle and open skies to dark tunnels and the constant fear of the mountain coming down on your head. You have a ranch, starting one, he corrected. Got a small spread about 20 miles outside Silver City. It's not much yet, a cabin and a few hundred acres with a decent creek running through it. But I've got plans. They fell into easy conversation after that, with Jack pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. When they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack, Tabitha fed Emma and changed her again. You're good with her, Jack observed as he watched Tabitha expertly rewrap the baby in her blanket. I've had plenty of practice, Tabitha replied with a small smile. Though I admit it's harder on the trail than it was at home. I imagine so. Jack hesitated, then added, if you don't mind my asking, what are your plans once you reach your aunt's? Tabitha sighed. Find work, I suppose. I can sew reasonably well, and I've done bookkeeping before. Anything to support Emma and not be a burden on my aunt for too long. Jack nodded thoughtfully. Silver City's growing. There should be opportunities for a capable woman. As they continued their journey, the terrain grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and steeper inclines. Jack dismounted at one particularly challenging stretch, leading the horse while Tabitha and Emma remained in the saddle. It's not far now, he assured her as he swung back up behind her after the difficult passage was behind them. Another hour, I'd reckon. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they finally crested a ridge that revealed Silver City nestled in the valley below. It was larger than Awahi but still modest by Eastern standards, a main street lined with wooden buildings, surrounded by smaller structures scattered across the landscape. There it is, Jack announced. Your new beginning. Tabitha felt a surge of emotion at his words. A new beginning indeed, though not one she had ever imagined for herself. A year ago, she had been a happily married woman in a comfortable home, expecting her first child. Now she was a widow, a mother, and essentially homeless, riding into an unfamiliar town with a stranger. As they approached Silver City, Jack asked, "Where does your aunt live?" "Oak Street," Tabitha replied. "Number 17. Her name is Margaret Hale." Jack guided Rusty through the dusty streets, navigating around wagons and pedestrians. Silver City was clearly a mining town, with rough-looking men outnumbering women and children. Tabitha found herself drawing closer to Jack instinctively, grateful for his protective presence. They found Oak Street easily enough, a quieter residential lane on the east side of town. Number 17 was a modest white clapboard house with blue shutters and a small front porch adorned with potted geraniums. Jack dismounted first, then carefully helped Tabitha and Emma down. As he was retrieving her luggage, the front door opened, and an older woman appeared. She was tall and thin, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her face lit up when she saw Tabitha. "Tabitha, my dear girl," she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "I've been so worried. The stagecoach arrived hours ago, and when you weren't on it, there was a problem, Aunt Margaret," Tabitha explained as her aunt embraced her carefully, mindful of Emma between them. "The driver wouldn't let us continue because Emma was crying." Margaret's face darkened with indignation. "The nerve! I'll be having words with the stage company about this." "It turned out for the best," Tabitha said, turning toward Jack. "This is Mr. Calloway. He very kindly offered to bring us here when we were stranded. Jack tipped his hat. Madam, just doing what anyone would. Not anyone, young man, Margaret said firmly, sizing him up with a shrewd gaze. And I'm very grateful. You must come in for supper at the very least. Jack hesitated. I wouldn't want to impose nonsense. I've got a pot of stew that's been simmering all day, plenty for everyone. I insist. Tabitha added her own invitation. Please, Mr. Calloway, it's the least we can do to thank you. Jack's resistance crumbled in the face of their combined persuasion. Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse? Let me just see to Rusty first. Of course. There's a hitching post right there, and you can give him water from the barrel around back, Margaret directed. While Jack tended to his horse, Margaret ushered Tabitha and Emma inside. The house was small but neat, with simple furnishings and colorful quilts adding warmth to the rooms. Let me look at this little angel, Margaret cooed, taking Emma from Tabitha's arms. Oh, she's beautiful, my dear. She has your eyes. Tabitha smiled tiredly. And her father's nose, I think. Come, I'll show you where you'll be staying. I've fixed up the back bedroom for you both. Margaret led her through the house, still cradling Emma. It's not large, but it should be comfortable. The bedroom was indeed small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a simple dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. A wooden cradle stood in the corner. The cradle was yours when you visited as a baby, Margaret explained. I've kept it all these years, never thinking I'd see it used again. Tears stung Tabitha's eyes. Thank you, Aunt Margaret, for everything. There, her aunt soothed. Family takes care of family. Now, wash up and rest a bit. I'll entertain your Mr. Calloway until supper's ready. He's not my Mr. Calloway, Tabitha protested. He's just a kind stranger. Margaret's eyes twinkled. If you say so, dear, but I saw the way he was looking at you. Take it from an old woman who's seen her share of longing glances. Before Tabitha could respond, her aunt swept out of the room with Emma, humming a lullaby. Alone for the first time in days, Tabitha sank onto the bed, emotions washing over her. Relief at having arrived safely. Gratitude for Jack's timely intervention. Apprehension about what the future might hold. And beneath it all, a tiny flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She allowed herself only a few moments of rest before rising to freshen up at the washstand. She changed her travel-stained dress for a simpler blue cotton one from her suitcase and retied her dark hair, which had come loose during the journey. When she entered the kitchen, she found Jack seated at the table, deep in conversation with Margaret. Emma was asleep in her cradle, which had been moved to a corner of the kitchen. Best grazing land in the county, according to the land office, Jack was saying. He broke off when he noticed Tabitha. Mrs. Greenfield, you look refreshed. Please call me Tabitha, she said, taking a seat at the table. After sharing a horse for half a day, I think we can dispense with formalities. Jack smiled. Tabitha it is, then, and I'm Jack. Jack was just telling me about his ranch, Margaret said as she stirred the stew. Sounds like quite an undertaking for a man on his own. It is that, Jack agreed, but I'm hoping to hire some help come spring when I increase my herd. The conversation flowed easily through supper, which was indeed delicious, a hearty beef stew with carrots and potatoes, served with fresh bread that Margaret had baked that morning. Jack ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting Margaret several times on her cooking. It's been a while since I've had a home-cooked meal this good, he admitted. I'm not much of a cook myself. A man needs a wife, Margaret declared, ignoring Tabitha's warning glance. Someone to keep a proper home. Jack's eyes briefly met Tabitha's, a hint of amusement in them. I can't argue with that, madam, just haven't found the right woman yet. Well, Silver City has several eligible young ladies, Margaret continued, undeterred. though most are looking for husbands with more established circumstances. Aunt Margaret, Tabitha chided gently. Jack laughed. It's all right. Mrs. Hale is just stating facts. I'm not exactly a prime catch yet, but give me a few years, and that ranch will be something to be proud of. I've no doubt, Margaret said approvingly. You strike me as a man who accomplishes what he sets out to do. After supper, Jack helped clear the table despite Margaret's protests. When Emma began to fuss, Tabitha excused herself to tend to her daughter. She returned to find Jack preparing to leave. I should be getting back, he said, reaching for his hat. Got an early start tomorrow. Cattle buyer coming to look at some stock. Of course, Tabitha said, surprising herself with the disappointment she felt. Thank you again for your help today. I don't know what we would have done without you. It was my pleasure, Jack replied, his eyes lingering on her face. Maybe I could call on you sometime, check how you're settling in. Before Tabitha could respond, Margaret answered for her. That would be lovely, perhaps Sunday after church. We could have dinner together. Jack smiled. Sunday it is then. He turned to Tabitha. If that's agreeable to you. Yes, she said softly. That would be nice. He said his goodbyes, thanking Margaret again for her hospitality. At the door he paused, looking back at Tabitha. I'm glad I happened by when I did in Awahi. Sometimes things work out in unexpected ways. Yes, they do, Tabitha agreed. Good night, Jack. Good night, Tabitha, Mrs. Hale. After he left, Margaret closed the door with a satisfied smile. What a fine young man, and quite handsome too. Aunt Margaret, please don't start matchmaking, Tabitha warned. I'm a widow with a baby. The last thing I need is romantic complications. Who said anything about romance? Margaret asked innocently. I'm simply observing that he seems like a good man, and good men are rare enough that they should be appreciated when found. Tabitha sighed but didn't argue further. The truth was, she had noticed Jack's handsome features and kind manner. But her heart was still tender from losing Thomas, and her priority had to be providing stability for Emma. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to Emma's soft breathing from the cradle, Tabitha found herself thinking of Jack Calloway's smile and the way he had come to their rescue like something out of a dime novel. It had been a day of unexpected turns, that was certain. And for the first time in months, she fell asleep without tears. The next few days were busy ones as Tabitha settled into life at her aunt's house. Margaret was a pillar of the community, having lived in Silver City since its early days as a mining camp. She had never married, dedicating her life instead to teaching at the local school until her retirement 2 years earlier. You'll need to meet people, Margaret declared on Tabitha's third day in town. We'll go to the Mercantile today. Mrs. Peterson runs it, and she knows everyone worth knowing. Tabitha dressed Emma in her best gown, a tiny white affair with embroidered flowers that she had sewn during her pregnancy. The day was crisp but sunny, perfect for a walk into town. The Silver City Mercantile occupied a prominent spot on Main Street. Its wide porch was lined with barrels and crates, and the large windows displayed everything from farm implements to fancy hairpins. The bell above the door tinkled as they entered. A plump woman with rosy cheeks looked up from behind the counter and broke into a smile when she saw Margaret. Margaret Hale, and this must be your niece we've heard about. Indeed, Harriet. This is Tabitha Greenfield and her daughter Emma. Tabitha, Mrs. Harriet Peterson. A pleasure, dear, Mrs. Peterson said warmly. And what a beautiful baby, may I? She reached for Emma, who gurgled happily as the shopkeeper bounced her gently. Oh, she's a charmer. You'll have to watch the boys when she grows up. Tabitha smiled politely, having heard similar comments many times before. Mrs. Peterson continued to coo over Emma while peppering Tabitha with questions about her journey and her plans in Silver City. Actually, I'm hoping to find work, Tabitha mentioned when she could get a word in. I have experience with bookkeeping and sewing. Mrs. Peterson's eyes lit up. Is that so? My accounts are in a terrible state since my girl married and moved to boys. My eyes aren't what they used to be for the small figures. Would you consider helping me get them in order? I could pay you fair wages. Tabitha glanced at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. I'd be delighted, Mrs. Peterson. Wonderful. When can you start? Tomorrow, if that suits you. My aunt has offered to watch Emma while I work. Perfect. Come by at 9 and we'll get you settled. As they continued their shopping, Tabitha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Employment so quickly it was more than she had dared hope for. Perhaps Silver City would be a place of new beginnings after all. They were selecting fabric for new curtains when the bell above the door rang again, and a familiar voice called out, "Morning, Mrs. Peterson." Tabitha turned to see Jack Calloway removing his hat as he entered. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise giving way to pleasure on his face. "Tabitha, Mrs. Hale, what a nice surprise." "Jack," Tabitha replied, aware of the curious glances from Mrs. Peterson and other customers. "Are you shopping today? Supplies for the ranch," he confirmed, approaching them. "How are you settling in?" "Very well. I've just secured employment with Mrs. Peterson starting tomorrow. That's wonderful news." His genuine happiness for her was evident in his smile. Mrs. Peterson bustled over, clearly intrigued by their familiar interaction. "Mr. Calloway, I didn't know you were acquainted with our newcomers. We met in Awahi," Jack explained, keeping the story simple. "Mrs. Greenfield needed assistance reaching Silver City." "How gallant, Mrs. Peterson remarked, her eyes twinkling. "Always the gentlemen are Mr. Calloway." Jack looked embarrassed and Tabitha decided to rescue him. "We shouldn't keep you from your shopping, Jack. I'm sure you're busy." "Never too busy for friendly conversation," he replied. "But I do have a list to get through. Still coming for Sunday dinner, I hope." "We're looking forward to it," Margaret assured him. After Jack moved to another part of the store, Mrs. Peterson leaned in conspiratorially. "Jack Calloway is one of our most eligible bachelors, you know. Has a good head on his shoulders, unlike some of the young men around here. Building up that ranch of his slowly but surely." "So I understand," Tabitha replied neutrally. "Lost his wife and baby in childbirth about 4 years ago," Mrs. Peterson continued, lowering her voice. "Came west afterward, trying to outrun the grief, I expect. Hasn't courted anyone since, though plenty have tried to catch his eye." Tabitha absorbed this information with surprise. Jack was a widower. With his easy smile and confident manner, she would never have guessed he carried such pain. Perhaps that explained the gentle way he had handled Emma, the understanding in his eyes when she'd mentioned her own loss. As they left the mercantile, Tabitha found herself watching Jack through the window as he examined a display of tools. He seemed to sense her gaze and looked up, offering a small wave that she returned before following her aunt down the boardwalk. "Mrs. Peterson certainly gave you an earful about Jack," Margaret observed as they walked home. "I had no idea about his past," Tabitha admitted. "He never mentioned a wife or child. Some wounds are too deep for casual conversation," Margaret said wisely, "but it might explain why he was so quick to help a widow and her baby in distress." Tabitha nodded thoughtfully. "It does put things in a different light." The next day, Tabitha began her work at the mercantile. Mrs. Peterson's accounts were indeed in disarray, but Tabitha found the task of organizing them satisfying. She worked in a small room behind the main store, able to hear the comings and goings of customers while maintaining enough privacy to concentrate. Emma stayed with Margaret, who was delighted to have a baby to fuss over. The arrangement worked well. allowing Tabitha to earn money while knowing her daughter was in loving hands. By the end of the week, Tabitha had established a pleasant routine. She worked mornings at the mercantile, took lunch with Margaret and Emma, then spent afternoons tending to household tasks or going for walks with her daughter. Silver City was beginning to feel less like a foreign place and more like a potential home. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Tabitha dressed with particular care for church, selecting a pale green dress that Thomas had always said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She pinned her hair up in a simple but elegant style and added a small cameo brooch her mother's at her throat. "You look lovely, dear," Margaret approved as they prepared to leave. "Is that for anyone in particular?" Tabitha ignored the teasing. "It's Sunday. I always try to look my best for church." The Silver City Church was a white wooden structure with a modest steeple, located at the quieter end of Main Street. As they approached, Tabitha was struck by how similar it was to the church in her Colorado hometown, where she had married Thomas just 2 years earlier. The thought brought a momentary pang, but she pushed it aside as they entered. The congregation was already mostly seated, and heads turned to observe the newcomers. Tabitha felt self-conscious under the scrutiny until she spotted Jack sitting in a pew near the back. He stood as they approached, offering his seat to Margaret while he slid over to make room for Tabitha and Emma. "Good morning," he whispered as the organist began the opening hymn. "You look very nice today." Tabitha felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you." The service was familiar and comforting, with hymns she had known since childhood and scripture readings that reminded her of a world beyond the immediate challenges of her life. Emma remained surprisingly quiet throughout, content to be passed between Tabitha and Margaret. At one point, Emma began to fuss softly, and Jack reached over to offer his finger for her to grasp. The baby immediately calmed, staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. The sight of Jack's large hand engulfed by Emma's tiny fingers created a strange tightness in Tabitha's chest. After church, they walked together to Margaret's house, where she had prepared a roast chicken with all the trimmings. The conversation flowed easily as they ate, with Jack sharing stories about his ranch and asking thoughtful questions about Tabitha's work at the mercantile. "Mrs. Peterson says my system for organizing the inventory has already saved her money," Tabitha reported proudly. "She's offered me additional hours if I want them." "That's excellent," Jack said, "though I hope she's not working you too hard." "Not at all. It's good to feel useful again, to contribute." After dinner, Margaret insisted on clearing up alone. "You two young people go sit on the porch. It's too fine a day to be inside." They didn't argue, settling into the 2 rocking chairs on the small front porch. Emma had fallen asleep, so Tabitha placed her in the cradle they had brought outside. "Your aunt is something else," Jack commented with a smile. "Doesn't mince words, does she?" "Never has," Tabitha agreed, "but her heart's in the right place." They rocked in companionable silence for a moment before Jack spoke again. "I heard from Mrs. Peterson that you know about my Sarah and the baby." Tabitha nodded, not surprised that word had gotten back to him. "Yes, she mentioned it. I'm very sorry, Jack." He looked out at the street, his profile strong against the afternoon light. "It was a long time ago now, 4 years in February." "Does it get easier?" Tabitha asked quietly. "The loss, I mean." Jack considered her question carefully. "Different, not easier, less raw maybe, but there are still days." He trailed off, then turned to face her. "How long has it been for you?" "6 months since Thomas died." "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes like another lifetime." "That's about right," Jack acknowledged. "Grief doesn't move in a straight line." They fell silent again, the only sound the creaking of the rocking chairs and distant laughter from children playing down the street. "Did Mrs. Peterson also tell you I'm practically destitute and living on my aunt's charity?" Tabitha asked suddenly, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Jack's eyebrows rose. "She did not. But even if you were, there's no shame in accepting help when needed. We all do at some point, I suppose." Tabitha sighed. This isn't how I imagined my life would be at 22, widowed with a baby starting over in a strange town." "Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for it," Jack said gently. "All we can do is make the best of where we find ourselves." His words, simple but profound, settled something in Tabitha's restless heart. They talked for another hour, sharing more of their histories: Jack's childhood in Tennessee, Tabitha's in Illinois, the circumstances that had brought them both to Nevada. When Jack finally stood to leave, Tabitha realized she had enjoyed his company more than any man since Thomas. "Thank you for dinner," he said formally as he put on his hat. "And for the conversation. I've missed having someone to really talk with." "So have I," Tabitha admitted. "Will we see you next Sunday?" Jack hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if you might like to come out to the ranch someday this week. You and Emma and your aunt too, of course," he added hastily. "I could show you around and we could have a picnic if the weather holds." "I'd like that," Tabitha said before she could overthink it. "Perhaps Wednesday. The mercantile closes early." "Wednesday it is. I'll come by with the wagon around 1 o'clock. After he left, Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression suspiciously innocent. "What a lovely afternoon." Jack seemed to enjoy himself. "He's invited us to visit his ranch on Wednesday," Tabitha informed her, "for a picnic. How nice. Unfortunately, I have my quilting circle that afternoon. Such a shame. You and Emma will have to go without me." Tabitha gave her aunt a knowing look. What a convenient scheduling conflict. Margaret didn't even try to deny it. "Providence works in mysterious ways, my dear." She patted Tabitha's shoulder as she passed. "Don't fret so much. There's no law saying you can't enjoy a gentleman's company less than a year after becoming a widow. Especially not out here where life is uncertain and often short." Tabitha wanted to protest, but the truth was, she was looking forward to Wednesday more than she cared to admit. The next few days passed quickly, filled with work and domestic tasks. By Wednesday, Tabitha found herself checking the clock frequently, anticipation building as 1 o'clock approached. Jack arrived precisely on time, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He had dressed in clean clothes, not formal, but notably neater than his usual working attire. "Ladies," he greeted them, helping Tabitha up to the seat with Emma in her arms. "Perfect day for a picnic." It was indeed beautiful, with a clear blue sky and just enough breeze to keep the heat bearable. As they drove out of town, Jack pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. Tabitha found herself relaxing, enjoying the scenery and Jack's company. After about 40 minutes, they turned onto a narrower trail that led through a stand of pine trees before opening into a valley. A small creek cut through the landscape, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. On a gentle rise overlooking the valley stood a cabin with a covered porch and a stone chimney. "There it is," Jack said, a note of pride in his voice. "Calloway Ranch." It was modest compared to some of the spreads Tabitha had seen, but there was something appealing about the neat cabin and the well-kept grounds surrounding it. A barn stood a short distance away, with corrals attached where several horses grazed. In a meadow beyond, Tabitha could see a small herd of cattle. "It's lovely, Jack," she said sincerely. "So peaceful." He smiled, pleased by her response. "It's not much yet, but I have plans. Another 5 years, and I hope to have 3 times the cattle and a proper house built where the cabin stands." He helped her down from the wagon and carried the picnic basket Margaret had prepared to a spot under a large cottonwood near the creek. After spreading a blanket on the grass, he offered to show them around while the day was still cool. "I'd like that," Tabitha said, settling Emma more comfortably in her arms. "Lead the way." Jack showed them the barn first, where his horses nickered softly in greeting. Then the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that was more weeds than vegetables at the moment, and finally the cabin itself. It was a simple structure, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom partitioned off with a curtain, and a lean-to kitchen at the back. But it was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's residence, with a sturdy table and chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair by the hearth, and shelves lined with books. "You read," Tabitha observed, running her finger along the spines. "Shakespeare, Dickens, Cooper, along with practical manuals on ranching and veterinary care. Winter nights are long," Jack explained, "and I always enjoyed a good story." He seemed almost embarrassed by his library. Not much else to do when the snows piled high. "I think it's wonderful," Tabitha assured him. Thomas wasn't much for reading. He preferred more active pursuits. They returned to the picnic spot, where Jack helped Tabitha spread out the food: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts. As they ate, Jack told her about his plans for the ranch, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "The creek never runs dry, which is rare in these parts. Good water means good grazing, and the valley's protected from the worst of the winter storms." "You've chosen well," Tabitha commented. "It's a beautiful piece of land. I was lucky to find it. The previous owner was an old prospector who'd given up on striking it rich and decided to try ranching instead. He wasn't suited for it, though too solitary in his habits. Cattle need tending, and that means hiring hands, dealing with buyers. He was ready to move on when I arrived." Emma began to fuss, and Tabitha realized it was time for her feeding. "I should, She gestured vaguely, suddenly aware of the awkwardness of the situation. Jack immediately understood. "Of course. Would you like to use the cabin? More private than out here." Grateful for his sensitivity, Tabitha accepted his offer. Inside, she settled in the armchair by the fireplace to nurse Emma, looking around at the cabin with new eyes. Despite its simplicity, it had the feeling of a home rather than merely a shelter. There were small touches: a colorful woven blanket over the back of a chair, a vase of wildflowers on the table that suggested Jack took pride in his surroundings. When she rejoined him by the creek, he was skipping stones across the water, lost in thought. He turned at her approach, his expression warming. "Everything all right, perfect," she replied, settling back on the blanket with Emma. "She'll sleep now, most likely." Jack sat beside them, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "She's a good baby, hardly cries at all, it seems. Don't let her fool you. She has her moments, usually in the middle of the night or when we're in public." Tabitha smiled down at her daughter. "But yes, I've been blessed with a generally contented child." "She looks like you," Jack observed. "Same expressive eyes." Tabitha was surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. Most people say she resembles Thomas. Maybe around the mouth a bit," Jack conceded. "But those eyes are definitely yours." The conversation drifted to lighter topics: town gossip shared by Mrs. Peterson, a humorous incident involving Jack's attempt to break a particularly stubborn horse, Tabitha's childhood adventures with her cousins in Illinois. Before they knew it, the afternoon was waning, the sun casting long shadows across the valley. "We should probably start back soon," Tabitha said reluctantly. "I don't want to worry Aunt Margaret." Jack nodded, though he seemed equally unwilling to end their time together. "Of course. Let me pack up the basket." As they prepared to leave, Tabitha took a last look at the ranch, trying to memorize its peaceful beauty. "Thank you for bringing us here, Jack. "It's been a lovely day." "The pleasure was mine," he replied, his voice sincere. "It's nice having company out here. Gets lonely sometimes, just me and the cattle." On the drive back to town, Emma slept soundly between them, and Tabitha found herself stealing glances at Jack's profile. There was something so solid about him, so reassuring in his quiet confidence. In the short time she'd known him, he had become someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose opinion mattered to her. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. When they reached Margaret's house, the lamps were already lit inside. Jack helped Tabitha down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Thank you again for today," she said, lingering beside the wagon. "Maybe we could do it again sometime," Jack suggested. "There's a harvest festival in town next month. It's nothing fancy, but there's music and dancing, games for the children." "I'd like that," Tabitha replied. "Very much." His smile was like sunrise. "Good night, then. Give my regards to your aunt." "I will. Good night, Jack." As Tabitha watched him drive away, she was aware of Margaret observing from the window. She braced herself for teasing as she entered the house, but her aunt merely took Emma from her arms with a knowing smile. "Did you have a nice time, dear?" "Yes," Tabitha admitted. "It's a beautiful ranch." And Jack was. "A perfect gentleman." Margaret nodded. "I expected no less. He strikes me as a man who respects boundaries." That night, as Tabitha prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Jack's cabin, imagining what it might be like to live in such a peaceful setting. She quickly dismissed the thought as foolish fancy. Her future was here in town, building a life for herself and Emma, not daydreaming about a widower rancher she barely knew. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Jack's smile that lingered in her mind. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Jack came to Sunday dinner regularly, and occasionally Tabitha and Emma accompanied him on rides to his ranch or other scenic spots in the area. Margaret, displaying a remarkable talent for developing last-minute commitments, often managed to leave them alone together. October brought cooler weather and the promised harvest festival. Tabitha had sewn a new dress for the occasion, a warm burgundy wool that complemented her dark hair. Jack arrived to escort them looking unusually formal in a clean black coat and new hat. "You look very handsome," Margaret observed as she ushered him inside. "Doesn't he, Tabitha?" "Very," Tabitha agreed, ignoring her aunt's lack of subtlety. "That coat suits you." Jack looked pleased by the compliment. "And you look beautiful. That color is perfect on you." The festival was held in an open area at the edge of town, with tables laden with food, a platform for musicians, and various games and contests set up for entertainment. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between posts, creating a festive atmosphere as dusk approached. They wandered through the crowds, stopping to chat with townsfolk Tabitha had come to know through her work at the mercantile. Jack was clearly well respected, receiving hearty greetings from the men and meaningful glances from their wives as they noted his companion. "I feel like we're being assessed," Tabitha murmured after a particularly obvious appraisal from the banker's wife. Jack chuckled. "Small towns. Everyone has an opinion about everyone else's business." "Does it bother you?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "Being seen with a widow and her child?" His expression grew serious. "Not one bit. Does it bother you, being seen with a man whose ranch is still more promise than profit?" "Not one bit," she echoed, smiling. The evening progressed pleasantly. They sampled dishes from the potluck supper, applauded the winners of various contests, and took turns holding Emma, who was wide-eyed at all the activity and colorful sights. When the dancing began, Tabitha assumed they would watch from the sidelines. Emma was sleeping in Margaret's arms by then, the excitement having finally worn her out. "Would you like to dance?" Jack asked unexpectedly as the musicians struck up a lively tune. Tabitha hesitated. "I haven't danced before Emma was born." "Neither have I," Jack admitted, "but I think I remember the steps." Margaret gave her an encouraging nod. "Go on, dear. Emma and I are perfectly comfortable here." Jack led Tabitha to the dance area, where several couples were already moving to the music. He took her hand in his, placed his other hand respectfully at her waist, and guided her into the dance. There was an initial awkwardness as they found their rhythm, but soon they were moving together as if they'd danced 100 times before. Jack was light on his feet for such a tall man, and Tabitha remembered how much she had once enjoyed dancing. "You're very good at this," she said, slightly breathless as they turned. "I had a good partner," he replied. "My mother insisted all her sons learn to dance properly, said no woman wants a man who clomps around like a draft horse." Tabitha laughed. "Wise woman, your mother." They danced 3 songs in succession before returning to Margaret, who was deep in conversation with the minister's wife. Emma still slept peacefully. The evening ended with a display of fireworks, simple but impressive against the dark sky. Standing beside Jack as the colors burst overhead, Tabitha felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in a very long time. As they walked home afterward, Jack carrying the sleeping Emma, Tabitha found herself wishing the night wouldn't end. At Margaret's door, Jack carefully transferred Emma to Tabitha's arms. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said softly, mindful of her sleeping daughter. "Thank you for agreeing to come with me," Jack replied. He seemed on the verge of saying more but glanced at Margaret, who was tactfully busy with the door key. "Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss." Tabitha's heart quickened at his serious tone. "Of course, after church. Perfect." He tipped his hat to both women. "Good night, ladies." After he left, Margaret helped Tabitha put Emma to bed, then fixed them each a cup of tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet around them. "He's going to ask you something important tomorrow," Margaret stated matter-of-factly. "You don't know that," Tabitha protested, though she suspected her aunt was right. "I've lived long enough to recognize when a man has made up his mind." Margaret sipped her tea. "The question is, have you made up yours?" Tabitha stared into her cup, watching the steam rise in lazy curls. "I don't know. It's all happened so quickly. I've only known Jack for 2 months. Sometimes 2 months is enough. Sometimes 20 years isn't." Margaret reached across the table to pat her niece's hand. "What does your heart tell you?" "That I'm afraid," Tabitha admitted. "Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of making a mistake. Thomas and I knew each other our whole lives before we married. Jack is still, in many ways, a stranger." "Is he?" Margaret challenged gently. "You've spent a great deal of time together. You've seen his home, met his friends, observed how he interacts with Emma and with others. Those things reveal a person's character far better than words." Tabitha nodded slowly. "He is a good man. Kind, honest, hardworking." "And he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars," Margaret added with a smile. "That counts for something too." Sleep was elusive that night as Tabitha turned Margaret's words over in her mind. Did she care for Jack? Undoubtedly. Could she imagine a future with him? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. When morning came, she dressed with particular care for church, choosing a simple blue dress that Jack had once complimented. Emma was unusually fussy, perhaps sensing her mother's nervous energy. At church, Jack sat with them as had become their custom, but Tabitha found it hard to concentrate on the service. Her mind kept wandering to what he might want to discuss later. Was Margaret right? Was he going to propose? And if he did, what would she say? After the service, they arranged for Jack to come to the house for lunch. Margaret outdid herself with the meal roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. "This is delicious, Mrs. Hale," Jack said appreciatively. "You're spoiling me with your cooking." "Nonsense. Growing boys need feeding," Margaret replied, ignoring the fact that Jack was nearly 30 and hardly a boy. "Besides, Tabitha did half the work. She's quite talented in the kitchen." Jack smiled at Tabitha across the table. "Another skill to admire." The meal concluded, and Margaret announced that she was going to visit a friend who had been under the weather. "I may be gone for hours," she added pointedly. "Don't wait supper for me." After she left, an awkward silence fell. Emma was napping in her cradle, leaving Jack and Tabitha truly alone for the first time. "Shall we sit in the parlor?" Tabitha suggested, gesturing to the small sitting room off the kitchen. Jack nodded, following her to where two comfortable chairs faced each other near the window. Once seated, he seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man who typically spoke his mind plainly. "Tabitha," he began finally, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about my life, my future, about what I want." She nodded, her heart racing. "And what have you concluded?" "That I've been alone long enough." He met her gaze directly. "When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I came west to start fresh, but I never expected to find someone who made me want to take a chance on love again." Tabitha's breath caught. "Jack, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you're still healing from your own loss. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, but I want you to know that I care for you deeply. And for Emma too." "I care for you too," Tabitha said softly. "More than I expected to." Jack's face brightened with hope. "Then would you consider a proposal, not for tomorrow or next week, but perhaps by Christmas? Time for us both to be certain. And then, if you felt ready, we could marry in the spring." The thoughtfulness of his approach, giving her time, respecting her need to be sure, touched Tabitha deeply. It was so characteristic of the man she had come to know. "That seems very sensible," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside her. Jack's smile faltered slightly. "Sensible? That's not exactly the response a man hopes for when declaring his intentions." Tabitha realized how her words must have sounded. "I didn't mean. What I meant was, yes, I would consider your proposal very happily." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Truly, truly," she confirmed, her own smile growing. "I think by Christmas I will know my heart completely. But even now, I can tell you that it's leaning very much in your favor." Jack reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. "That's all I can ask for, time and a fair chance." They talked for hours after that, making tentative plans while acknowledging that nothing was settled yet. Jack spoke of improvements he wanted to make to the cabin if they were to live there: another bedroom for Emma, a proper kitchen, maybe a small parlor where Tabitha could receive visitors. "And your aunt would always be welcome," he added. "There's room enough for all of us, especially once the new house is built." The thought of Margaret living with them brought both amusement and comfort to Tabitha. She might be more help than hindrance, especially with her cooking. "And her matchmaking," Jack added with a chuckle. "Though I suppose we should thank her for that." When Margaret returned late in the afternoon, she took one look at their faces and broke into a knowing smile. "Well, it's about time. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar together." "Aunt Margaret!" Tabitha exclaimed, blushing. Jack laughed. "Your niece has agreed to consider my proposal, Mrs. Hale. By Christmas she'll give me her final answer." "Christmas," Margaret repeated, eyebrows raised. "That's nearly 3 months away. You young people today are so cautious." "In my day, if a man and woman were sweet on each other, they didn't waste time." "We're just being prudent," Tabitha defended. making sure it's right for everyone, including Emma. Margaret softened at the mention of her great niece. Well, I can't argue with that. Though I will say, Jack Calloway, that if you break her heart, you'll have me to answer to. Yes, madam, Jack replied solemnly. I understand completely. The following weeks took on a dreamlike quality for Tabitha. She continued working at the mercantile, caring for Emma, and helping Margaret around the house. But now there was also Jack coming to town more frequently, taking her for drives on Sunday afternoons, sharing books and conversations, and gradually becoming an essential part of her daily life. November brought colder weather and the first light snowfall. Jack was busy preparing his ranch for winter, but he still made time to visit at least twice a week. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Emma had been put to bed, he presented Tabitha with a small package. It's not a ring, he said quickly as she began to unwrap it. That will come at Christmas if your answer is yes. This is just something I thought you might like. Inside the paper was a beautifully carved wooden music box. When Tabitha opened it, a gentle melody played Green Sleeves, one of her favorite tunes. Jack, it's beautiful, she whispered, touched by his thoughtfulness. Where did you find it? Carson City. I had business there last week and saw it in a shop window, made me think of you. She ran her fingers over the intricate floral design on the lid. Thank you, I'll treasure it. There's something else, he said, suddenly nervous again. A letter inside. You don't have to read it now, but… Tabitha lifted the silk lining of the box and found a folded piece of paper. She looked at Jack questioningly. It's about Sarah, he explained, and about us. Things that were easier to write than say aloud. Understanding the significance, Tabitha carefully refolded the letter without reading it. I'll read it when I'm alone. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Tabitha sat up in bed and opened Jack's letter by candlelight. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, the words flowing across the page with an eloquence she hadn't expected. My dear Tabitha, I find there are things in my heart that my tongue stumbles over when I try to speak them, so I'm trusting this paper to carry my thoughts to you more clearly. You know that I lost my wife and child 4 years ago. What you may not know is how completely that loss shattered me. Sarah was my childhood sweetheart, the only woman I had ever loved. When she and our son died in childbirth, I felt as though my future had been buried with them. I came west not to build a new life, but to escape the ruins of my old one. The ranch was meant to be a place to hide, not a home to cherish. For 3 years, that's how I lived, existing rather than living, working from sunup to sundown so I would be too tired to think when night came. Then I saw you standing in the dust outside that Stagecoach station, holding your baby and looking both desperate and determined. Something shifted inside me in that moment, though I couldn't have named it then. These past months with you and Emma have awakened parts of me I thought were dead forever. I find myself making plans again, seeing a future that extends beyond the next season. I catch myself smiling for no reason other than the memory of something you said, or the way Emma grabs my finger when I hold her. I want you to know that loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for Sarah. I will always carry her in my heart. But I've come to understand that the heart has an infinite capacity for love it doesn't replace. It expands. If you choose to share your life with me, I promise to honor that choice every day, to be a good husband to you and a good father to Emma, to build a home filled with warmth and laughter and love. But if you decide your heart isn't ready, or that I'm not the right man to walk beside you in this life, I will respect that too. Your happiness matters more to me than my own desires. Whatever you decide at Christmas, please know that meeting you has already been a gift beyond measure. With deepest affection, Jack, tears slipped down Tabitha's cheeks as she finished reading. The raw honesty of Jack's words touched her deeply. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the music box, her mind swirling with emotions. She had been so focused on her own fears and uncertainties that she hadn't fully considered Jack's journey, the courage it took for him to open his heart again after such devastating loss. His willingness to be vulnerable with her, to share both his pain and his hope, moved her profoundly. In that moment, Tabitha realized she didn't need until Christmas to know her answer. But she would wait, as they had agreed, giving herself these weeks to be absolutely certain that the choice she made was right for everyone. December arrived with a fierce snowstorm that blanketed Silver City in white. Travel became difficult, and Tabitha worried about Jack out at his ranch. When he appeared at their door 3 days after the storm, his coat crusted with ice and his face reddened from the cold, she couldn't help throwing her arms around him in relief. "I was so worried," she admitted, stepping back in embarrassment when she realized what she'd done. Jack's smile was worth the temporary loss of decorum. "Takes more than a bit of snow to keep me away." He produced a small package from his coat pocket. "Besides, I couldn't let Emma's St. Nicholas Day go uncelebrated." The tiny wooden horse he had carved for Emma became her favorite toy, though she was still too young to do much more than hold it and occasionally gum its mane. The fact that Jack had remembered the traditional December 6th celebration from Tabitha's German heritage touched her deeply. As Christmas approached, the entire town seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of Tabitha's answer to Jack's proposal. It was remarkable how quickly their courtship had become common knowledge, with Mrs. Peterson likely serving as the primary conduit of information. "That Calloway boy was in today buying fabric," she reported to Tabitha one afternoon at the mercantile. "Finest blue wool we carry. Said it reminded him of a certain lady's eyes." She peered at Tabitha meaningfully. "Wouldn't say what it was for, though." Tabitha smiled but refused to be drawn into gossip, even well-intentioned. "Jack is very thoughtful, and very much in love," Mrs. Peterson added. "Anyone with eyes can see it, and I'd say the feeling is mutual, judging by that blush on your cheeks." The truth was, Tabitha had never been more certain of anything than her feelings for Jack. The more time they spent together, the more she admired his character, his gentle strength, his unwavering kindness. And the way he was with Emma, patient, tender, delighting in her smallest achievements, convinced her that he would be the father her daughter deserved. Christmas Eve arrived clear and cold. Margaret's house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and the aroma of baking filled every corner. Jack was coming for dinner, and afterward, Tabitha would give him her answer. She dressed with care in her best green dress, arranging her hair in loose curls around her face the way Jack had once said he liked. Emma, now 9 months old and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, was dressed in a white gown with red ribbons that Margaret had sewn especially for the occasion. When Jack arrived, he was carrying multiple packages and wearing his best suit. His face lit up when he saw Tabitha, his eyes warm with admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "So do you," she replied, then laughed. "Handsome, I mean, not beautiful." "I'll take either compliment from you," he assured her, setting down his parcels to remove his coat. Dinner was a festive affair, with Margaret outdoing herself on the meal, and Jack entertaining them with stories of Christmas traditions from his childhood in Tennessee. Emma, seated on Tabitha's lap, was unusually well behaved, as if she sensed the significance of the evening. After the meal, they gathered in the parlor where a small pine tree stood decorated with paper ornaments and candles. Margaret had insisted on the German tradition for Emma's sake, though they lit the candles only briefly, mindful of the fire hazard. Gifts were exchanged: a knitted scarf from Margaret to Jack, books for both women from him, handmade items that Tabitha had crafted for each of them. Emma received a soft cloth doll from Margaret and was more interested in the colorful paper than the presents themselves. As the evening progressed, Tabitha found herself growing increasingly nervous. Jack must have sensed her anxiety, for he suggested they step outside for a moment to see the stars, though they both knew the real purpose. The night was crisp and clear, the snow glistening under the moonlight. Jack had brought her shawl, wrapping it carefully around her shoulders as they stood on the porch. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gazing at the starry sky. "Christmas Eve always seems magical somehow." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, wait," he interrupted gently. "Before you say anything, I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "I know we said you'd give me your answer tonight, but I wanted you to have this regardless of what you decide." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a delicate gold band with a small but perfect diamond at its center, flanked by tiny blue stones that matched her eyes. "It was my grandmother's," Jack explained. "My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you. She said it should belong to the woman who brought joy back into my life." Tabitha stared at the beautiful ring, tears blurring her vision. "Jack, it's perfect. Like you," he said softly. "Tabitha, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your devotion to Emma. I love the way you laugh and the way you stand up for yourself and others. I love watching you with your daughter and imagining a future where we raise her together, maybe with brothers and sisters to keep her company." He took her hand in his. "I'm asking you now, officially, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me at the ranch, raise a family together, grow old beside me?" Tabitha didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears now flowing freely. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was gathering her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Margaret's voice came from the doorway. "Well, it's about time. Now come inside before you both catch your death. There's spiced cider warming on the stove, and we have a wedding to plan." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers across the valley where Jack's ranch nestled. The cabin had been expanded over the winter, a new bedroom added for Emma, the kitchen enlarged, and a proper porch built across the front. Inside, touches of Tabitha's presence were already evident in curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, and wildflowers in jars on the tables. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony they had planned. Guests began arriving mid-morning, townspeople from Silver City, neighboring ranchers, and even Jack's mother and brothers who had made the long journey from Tennessee to meet his bride. Under an arbor twined with early roses, with Emma toddling happily nearby under Margaret's watchful eye, Tabitha and Jack exchanged their vows. She wore a simple ivory dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, her dark hair crowned with a wreath of spring blossoms. Jack, looking somewhat uncomfortable but undeniably handsome in his new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. "I, Jack, take you, Tabitha, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Tabitha repeated the vows, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was both tender and promising, a beginning rather than an ending. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and the goodwill of a community that had embraced them both. As dusk fell, the last guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone with Emma and Margaret. "I'll get this little one to bed," Margaret offered, lifting a sleepy Emma into her arms. "You two enjoy the evening. Tomorrow's soon enough to start being practical married folk." After she disappeared into the house, Jack turned to Tabitha, taking both her hands in his. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I never imagined when that stagecoach left me behind that it would lead to this." "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes," Jack mused. "If that driver hadn't been such a grouch, we might never have met." "Then I suppose we owe him our thanks," Tabitha said with a laugh. "I'd rather thank Providence," Jack replied. "Or whatever force arranged for me to be riding into Awahi at exactly the right moment to find you." As twilight deepened into night, they stood together on the porch of their home, looking out at the land that would sustain their family for generations to come. Emma slept peacefully inside, Margaret was settled in the room that would be hers whenever she wished to stay, and the future stretched before them, full of promise. "I love you, Jack Calloway," Tabitha whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I love you, Tabitha Calloway," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." 5 years later, the Calloway ranch had grown substantially. The cabin had been replaced by a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor where Tabitha gave piano lessons to the children of neighboring ranchers. The herd had tripled in size, and Jack employed 3 full-time hands to help manage the expanding operation. Emma, now nearly 6 years old, was joined by her 3-year-old brother Thomas and baby sister Sarah, named for Jack's first wife in a gesture that spoke volumes about Tabitha's security in their marriage. On a warm September afternoon, remarkably similar to the day they had first met, Jack and Tabitha sat on their porch watching Emma teach Thomas how to skip stones across the creek while baby Sarah slept in her cradle nearby. "You ever think about that day in Awahi?" Jack asked, his hand finding Tabitha's as it often did when they had quiet moments together. "Sometimes," she admitted, "though it seems like another lifetime now. I thank God every day for that cantankerous stagecoach driver," Jack said with a smile. "Best piece of luck I ever had, finding you and Emma stranded there." "It wasn't luck," Tabitha corrected gently. "It was destiny." As the children's laughter floated up from the creek, and the setting sun bathed their home in golden light, Jack and Tabitha Calloway counted their blessings each other, their children, this land, and the chance meeting that had brought them together against all odds. Life in the West was never easy. There would be hard winters ahead, drought years, illnesses and challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face them together, just as they had built this life together one day at a time, with love as their foundation and faith as their guide. And if sometimes, in the quiet of night, they remembered the people they had lost, Thomas in the mine, Sarah in childbirth, it was with gratitude for the time they'd had with them, and for the unexpected joy they'd found in each other. For life, they had learned, was about moving forward without forgetting, loving again without betrayal, and finding happiness in the places and people least expected. In the years to come, their story would be told and retold throughout the region, the tale of the widow and her baby, stranded and rescued by a rancher with a heart big enough for them both. It would become one of those frontier legends that spoke to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. But for Jack and Tabitha, it wasn't legend or myth, it was simply their life, built day by day, season by season, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations.